As I mentioned last night, every August I carve out a few days for a high holiday sermon writing retreat at Stinson Beach. Though I begin to think about sermon topics and themes and music months before the holidays, it is not until late summer that I can steal away to write. August is always a busy month in shul life, with B'nai Mitzvah most weekends, planning for the new year in full swing, Elul programming getting up and running, and the basics of my day-to-day job as the solo clergy of our community on high demand after my vacation in July. So this writing retreat comes at a time that I need it both practically and spiritually. It forces me to clear my days and to focus my attention entirely on the messages and poetry and kavanot I want to share with you over the course of the 10 days of tshuva. It also gives me critical time alone in my head and heart to get grounded before being solely responsible for creating and holding our congregation's spiritual path through the holidays. I take my responsibility as your spiritual leader very seriously, and I truly did not think it would be humanly possible for me to do this job by myself without those few days of silence at Stinson Beach. I write for a few hours, then put on my hiking shoes and hit the trails, hoping every time that majestic Mount Tamalpais will help to shake my sermons loose. And she never disappoints. No matter how tangled up my thoughts may be, after a few hours of hiking through the redwoods and ferns and streams of Mount Tam, I always come back with enough space created for me to hear what I am meant to say to you. And so, to begin, I want to dedicate my teaching today, this Torah, to Mount Tamalpais, and to the Miwok people who lived there long before we were here, and to their understanding of the wisdom and medicine of that life-giving mountain. On the first morning of my retreat, I awoke, tea in hand, ready to dive in, to a text from Lisa that her dad had just died. Her dad had been home on hospice, so we knew the end was near. But you're never ready for someone to die, not even an elderly parent, not even when you know that it would be a mercy for him to be out of pain. Before I had left for my retreat, we had both sent out a small prayer that we'd hang on just a little bit longer so her family could have just a little bit more time with him, so she could get back down to him, so I could complete my writing retreat. But none of that was in the cards for us. Just as Lisa was about to settle into her new classroom at school, just when I thought I knew exactly what my next 3 days would hold, I was reminded, once again, that almost nothing in life works out just as we want it to, in our time, on our schedule, in our order of the universe. Because really, could there be a worse time for me to abandon my deeply needed plan to be quiet so that I could be ready for all of you in this room than on the very first morning of my retreat? Not really. The timing was the worst, as death often is, which left me and Lisa with the question of what to do. It didn't take us long to decide that I should stay and write while she went to Southern California to be with her mother and brother, and that I would hopefully join them in the few days. I knew, she knew, that we had to take into consideration more variables than just death. And yet, even when we had made the decision for me to stay, I spent the day questioning the decision. Should I have left? Should I leave now? Where am I needed more? Why can't I be in two places at once? It was only after I got back from hiking the steep ravine trail, thank you, Idel, for the reminder and encouragement, and after asking our very wise Sue Boydak for a few minutes of spiritual direction that I desperately needed, only then did I understand that I was asking the wrong questions. I was staying, she was going. I would probably join her later in the week, but at that moment, we did not know. So the question was not, should I stay or should I go? It became many questions at once. Now that I'm staying, how do I hold the contradiction in my heart? How do I stay knowing I should also be there? How do we hold boundaries in our most intimate relationships? Can we ever really hold someone else through their private grief journey especially when it involves families of origin? And ultimately, fundamentally, are we, each and every one of us, no matter the love in our lives, alone? I wanted an answer, as I always do. I wanted a sign. I wanted clarity from God for once. I got a little clarity last night with the microphone. Is that so much to ask? Well, yes, it is, because as it turns out, God is not in the clarity business. God is in the messy business, and that you think your life should be neat, but clearly is not business. No, as always, I would not get a clear answer. And miraculously, one could almost say, divinely, that truth led directly to this sermon right here. I knew before I got that text from Lisa that I wanted to talk about the Akedah this morning, the binding of Isaac. This text that has us perplexed, and we've been enchanted with it for millennia. I knew that I had a new understanding to share, a new teaching, a new sliver of meaning that has changed my feelings about the text entirely. But I didn't know how to hold the whole thing together. I was still waiting for my container, for my story, my broad lesson that zooms out beyond the minutia of the text. And despite my resistance, it landed right in my lap on that Monday morning. Before I turn to the text, I would like to invite you all to abandon anything you think you've known about the Akedah for as many years as you have studied it, or read it, or struggled with it. Put those thoughts to the side, all of them. How could Abraham have been so quick to say Hineni, to not question, to just go along with God's request to sacrifice his child? Tuck that away for now. Take your son, your only son, seriously. What about Ishmael? You could put that one aside too. In fact, let's put up a little bulletin board right here with lots of colorful little push pins and stick everything you think you felt or known about the Akedah onto that piece of cork. Where is Sarah's voice? Ooh, that one gets a prime spot on our collective thought experiment. Does God really want us to be subservient and not question? You could put that one in the top right corner. Is faith about giving up what we love most? Be my guest. Take a big old push pin and stick that one on the bottom left. And of course, the kicker. You cannot believe that God would ask Abraham to sacrifice his own son. That one can go right smack in the middle of the board. Now I'm going to take the board, I'm going to tuck it away and keep it for you. It's not going anywhere. You can go back to it and retrieve your questions and objections after this sermon is over. But for now, I want you to open your minds to seeing the story in a completely different light. I'll do it too. 15 years ago, the year that our son Levi was born, I gave a mini sermon connecting the binding of Isaac to circumcision. So I have some untangling from my assumptions to do too. Okay, let me spin a new tale for you, a new angle. Same story, but tilted on its side. And for the spin, I offer up my profound gratitude to Rabbi Dr. Erin Leib-Smokler for her wisdom about this teaching. Our story begins before the beginning. It does not begin at Genesis 22, when God tells Abraham to set out from Mount Moriah to sacrifice his son, his only son, the one he loves, Isaac. And Abraham says simply in response, Hineni, I am here to do your will. No, it begins, in fact, one chapter before, in chapter 21, when God tells Abraham that his son Isaac will be the father of many generations. Ki v'yitzchak yikarei lecha zara. For in Isaac you will have offspring. Your son will not be the last of his generation, but in fact, the first of all the generations of the Jewish people to come. And then in chapter 22, we find ourselves at the beginning of the Akedah, in which God tells Abraham to go and kill the son who God has just promised would secure Abraham's legacy in perpetuity. Isaac will create our future. Now kill him before he has a chance to do it. Abraham is faced with a profound existential question at this moment. It is not, do I listen to God's command? How can I? What do I do? But rather, How do I proceed? How do I say yes, which I know that I will, because this is Abraham and God we're talking about, when saying yes means understanding that God is asking me to contradict God's own promise about our future? What does fulfilling this command mean about my relationship with God? This, according to Dr. Smokler, is the real test of the Akedah. Not, will you obey me without questioning no matter how horrifying my command, but rather, can you believe in me despite the fundamental incongruity of what I have asked you to do? Can you attempt to make clarity and meaning out of the incomprehensible? That is the real test. And Abraham's answer? Hineni. So Abraham takes Isaac and 2 of his servants and the wood for the fire, and they begin their journey, arriving by Yom HaShlishi, on the 3rd day, to a place where Abraham can see their destination in the distance. Bayom HaShlishi, Vayisa Avraham et einav. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifts his eyes and sees Vayar hamakom merachok. He sees the place, hamakom, from afar. Now, every time I have read this verse, I have understood that the word hamakom has a double meaning. It means both the place, literally, and it is one of our names for God, hamakom, the place. That has always been clear. Abraham looks up and sees both the place where he is meant to sacrifice his son, and he also understands that God is there. But listen to what Rashi says about this verse. Abraham looks up, and what does he see, Rashi asks? He sees a cloud on top of the mountain. Rashi imagines that Abraham does not just see the shining presence of the divine waiting for him to help make his awful errand less heartbreaking. No, he sees the truth in the errand itself, which is that in order to be in relationship with a God who asks you to do things, like sacrifice your son after promising you future generations through that very son, is to be in relationship with cloudiness, with doubt, and with paradox. Vayar hamakom, he sees the murkiness of the divine-human relationship in the distance. And what about merachok, from afar? I've always found comfort in this phrase, imagining that Abraham could see and feel God's presence even from a distance. He looked up and saw God. Everything would be okay. But the Sfat Emet, Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Leibalter, says, no. You're putting the emphasis in the wrong place. He saw God merachok, from afar, meaning he saw just how far away God is. The Holy One hid from him, the Sfat Emet says. And in that moment, Abraham understood that his test that day was not just about contending with a contradictory God, but with a contradictory God who is always and forever just out of reach. And then in verse 5, yes, we are only 5 verses in, Abraham says an incredible thing. He sees where they're going. He understands how offensive their errand is. And he turns to his servants and says, you stay here with the animals. The boy and I will go up there. We'll worship, and we will return to you. We. Here's the plan, Abraham says. I'm just going to go up to that mountain, kill my son, and then the 2 of us will come back down and we'll all go home together. This is Abraham at his very best, leaning way into the absurdity of the journey. It is, according to Rashi, Abraham showing himself to be a prophet. He could see the future at that moment. Isaac would actually live. Or perhaps it has nothing to do with the future, and it is in fact Abraham understanding reality in the messy present moment. He could somehow hold 2 opposing truths simultaneously. He could follow God's command while also believing that God would keep God's redemptive promise and Isaac would survive. This is the moment of the ultimate paradox of God. It is yes and, not either or. It is a reminder, once again, that God doesn't play by our human rules. We want clarity, and God offers up a big bowl of contradiction soup for lunch. You want to know what to do a difficult moment in life? What decision to make? You want an answer? What the right thing is to do? You're asking the wrong questions, God says. Try again. Our story concludes in the familiar way, with an angel of God stopping Abraham from slaying his son and providing a ram for the offering instead. Hallelujah! We made it. One ram exchanged for one Isaac. Chapter over. We can put this one behind us for another year. Except, let's take one more peek at the text and see what final treasures it has for us. Vayisa Avraham et einav, we read in verse 13. And Abraham lifted his eyes and saw there in a thicket a ram caught by its horns. Does that part of this phrase sound familiar? Vayisa Avraham et einav, Abraham lifted his eyes. Our story concludes in the same way that it opened, with an act of seeing. In verse 4 we read, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place, Hamakom, in the distance. And here in verse 13 we read, he lifted his eyes, Vayisa Avraham, to see the ram for the offering. Oh, the Torah is so elegant, bookending our story with the same words. And then the Torah brings it home. For every year of my life that I have studied this text, I focused on the ram, on the offering at this moment. But what about the thicket? Why does the Torah specify where the ram is caught if it isn't important? Because it is. The angel did not just make a ram appear out of thin air. Poof, here you go, Abraham. No, the ram is caught in a thicket, in a dense bush of thorny branches, sharp and painful to the touch. How did Abraham know that the ram was meant to be the offering instead of Isaac? Not just because it appeared, but because of where it appeared. According to the Lubliner Rav, Abraham is sure that the ram was indeed intended to be sacrificed in place of his son by virtue of the fact that it was caught in a thicket. When he saw that there was complexity and obstruction, he understood that it was heaven sent, that it was an object of mitzvah. Just like Rashi's vision of the cloud that awaited Abraham and Isaac, the thicket was a reminder of the true nature of our relationship with God, that despite it being murky, challenging, complicated, it is ultimately powerfully rewarding because in the end, the covenant stands. So where does that leave us today? How does that new framing of the story help us right here and now? Here's how. I see in this story an invitation to a true sense of wholeness. Believe it or not. Wholeness being not clarity of vision or sure solid steps beneath us, but rather an expansive understanding of what it means to find our shlemut, our wholeness, our peace in a world exactly as it is. It is not life or death decisions that are the hardest ones, but rather life and death. Blessing and curse. It is, to quote the marvelous Krista Tippett once again, when human beings have to hold seemingly opposing realities in a creative tension and interplay, power and frailty, birth and death, pain and hope, beauty and brokenness, mystery and conviction, calm and fierceness, mine and yours. Every surface of fracture in our world notwithstanding, for us, all of life is being revealed in its insistence on wholeness. It is the calling of callings to make that vivid and practical and real, starting inside ourselves and with the lives we've been given. The calling of callings. Not to know for certain what you must do next, but rather to make space for the truth that our wholeness, our relationship to God, to one another, depends entirely on expanding into the inherent contradictions in life and knowing that we are not alone there. the rest of the human family, the rest of this congregation, the rest of our biblical ancestors are right there with us. I did make it down to Southern California to lead a service for Lisa's father after my writing retreat was done. And as is so often the case with these tangled moments in life, be they our moments today or biblical moments that our ancestors struggled with, it all worked out as it was meant to. Not because it was perfect or clear or divinely ordained, but because, like Abraham and Isaac finding their answer in the thorns of a prickly bush, my answer was the ever-unfolding reminder of the complexity of this whole messy human thing we're out there doing every day. We try our best to live with grace, with equanimity, despite the storms that rage within us, despite our powerful desire for clarity of vision and purpose, despite our false belief that our wholeness depends on a straight path opening before us. Lisa and I had prayed for her father to live just a little bit longer so that many things could happen while he was still alive, and he did not. And so today I pray, not for life to unfold as I hope and want it to, but for all of us to be blessed with true wholeness in this new year, complex, frustrating, imperfect, and oh, so very beautiful.